templates and Seps criteria, and it's been a project that was preceded by a strategic plan through NIBS as well for Seps that was worked on jointly by VA and DoD DHA. So sessions throughout the last few months. There are obviously many different stakeholders in this process. Today's session is specifically to the VA project managers and internal to VA on how you can use this new process to work through projects and work with your consultants, the architects and engineers that are working. We've had other sessions training the AEs that work on the department updates to the TIL and into Seps, but today's session is geared towards the VA. So with that, I think we'll get started. And we're hearing some background noise here, so we're going to mute. Or can you mute your phones if you're online and you're talking? Because we'd like to keep the background noise to a minimum. Okay, thank you. So we'll open it up for question and answers after the introduction section, which will run about 10 or 15 minutes. So I'd like to start and go from there. So let's get started here. So today's session is on Seps and BIM, the Space and Equipment Planning System, and Building Information Modeling. And is geared towards how the VA can actually work with Seps to output data that can be used for the architects and engineers that work on these projects. So let's go into presentation mode here. Okay, great. So it's a new process for using BIM and Seps together for facility planning and design. There is a training material on the TIL, and we'll open up the TIL and point you to the specific pages of new material and presentations and videos geared towards not only towards VA, but also to the architects and engineers that will be using these tools. And here's the URL. Basically, you go in from the top level of the TIL into and drill into this section, and we'll open this up live later on in this presentation. So this is about the space and equipment used by VA and DoD Military Health System, DHA. We all are familiar with Seps, I believe, how you log in and can start setting up a project. And the most important message today, as far as geared towards the VA project planners and project managers that use Seps, is that you get to do anything different in Seps other than to be aware that there's an export function from Seps that can be handed to the design teams that helps them get the data into BIM. So as we're all familiar, there's a program for design and PFD and the project room contents that comes out of Seps, and there's another format called Seps Bim Excel that essentially is an Excel file that comes an Excel file. And most importantly, it also has IDs in it that can be used to track data into building information models. So that's the main part of the presentation today, is to make you aware that this new format exists, or the format has been there, but we've actually refined that to help support the design and construction process. So conceptually, it has a lot of data coming out of Seps that says here are the spaces, here's the equipment, the content, and here are the attributes. Those are connected to BIM. And as part of our project through NIBS, we've actually been preparing what we call BIM templates, which are prototypical layouts of spaces that match BIMs. And we'll walk through that as well. So the goal here is to move from static documents to BIM. As we know, in a healthcare project, even in a small one, there's a lot of data coming out of Seps, and we actually counted it for a 1 million square foot hospital, for example. There's 2.5 million pieces of data that Seps outputs, the spaces, the equipment. So in concept, obviously that's a lot of very valuable data because it sets the stage of the requirements for a project, but we're saying by connecting Seps, which is already a database, to BIM, Building Information Modeling, which is essentially a database connected to CAD or three-dimensional models, it automates the mundane work of getting the names of the space equipment, the right equipment, and the right size of the equipment to the architectural teams as a starting point. It doesn't automate the design process because obviously there are still, the task is still the same as before. They are tasked to use that as a starting point from their contract and design the project around that and to keep track of elements happen, because obviously as you start going into an actual layout and you have structural systems and everything, you're moving spaces around and adjusting sizes even, and even adjusting equipment inside spaces, and to be able to track that obviously is the biggest benefit of this. So the export from Seps, the new export from Seps that we're asking you to be aware of, and it has been there for several years, it has been using this. There's a button, two up from the bottom, that's called Project Bim Export in the reports section of Seps. After you're ready to hand the Excel file to the design teams, you use this Project Bim Export, and it's a single Excel file. That's the main difference between the PFD and PRC, which splits the Excel files into Bim Excel Export, actually combines it into one Excel file and has a separate tab for spaces and a separate tab for equipment, and also has other data, IDs that building information models need to use to track information. So this is the most important point of today's presentation, is to be aware that this export exists and to use this export to hand it to the design teams, and we won't get into the technical aspects of what they do with this file, but in concept there's a lot of presentations and videos online already of what one would do if I'm an architect. Going into BIM, I would take this Seps Bim Excel Export file, and there are tools to automate the creation of these templates. Have been set up as part of this NIBS project. Templates would actually have layouts, the ones that have layouts already. It's kind of like the till that has design guides, except these are in BIM. And as an architect, I'm actually an architect, so I've had experience with BIM for quite a few years, but I'm seeing that in the industry, using building information modeling tools for designs like this is really becoming the norm. It's not an outlier anymore. It's really, especially on complex projects or even on simple projects for that matter, and a project with, using BIM helps me as an architect focus on the design work and not have to count things and say, do I have the right number of equipment here, or to manually translate it from a PDF or an Excel file into CAD. So it's a tool that is becoming mainstream, and as an owner, as VA, we are basically recommending as data that is very useful for BIM. It's a perfect match. So Seps already existed, and basically we guided on how the Seps output can be used for BIM. So the other output from this is now looking kind of from the architect side. Once they have these spaces in their BIM applications, then they can do an initial test fit of a department, for example. And different tools here on screen. We're seeing Revit on the right side, which is a BIM application that a lot of architects use for designing construction. And then we also have other tools like Sketchup. The ones on the left are actually an iPad application view on the bottom. And then we also have our own tool called the Onuma system that we used for managing this project, that is also used for quick early planning and other. So one of the other outputs from this, from the architect side again too, is because the Seps output, for example, has a square footage requirement of spaces. I'm an exam room and I want to be 120 square feet and I have all this equipment in it. Then you can do this delta checking. Okay, what was the program requirements? Now where am I in BIM? And you can do this in Revit. There are tools in the Onuma system where you can actually look at a floor plan, say color code the floor plan, which you see at the top, green if a space is larger than what the requirement was. The blue plan on the left side signifies the requirement coming out of Seps. The plan at the top shows where am I currently in the design, and you're doing a delta check. And this can happen in real time as a designer works through a project spaces, and then be able to, on the fly, just create a report saying, how am I doing on the design? And that is part of the strength of BIM that allows the architect to focus more on the design process rather than counting square footage, for example. And this tracking for design obviously is a very important part of the, from the VA's perspective, being able to get submittals that say, how are we doing on the basic function, and one that needs to happen and throughout the life of a project. And things change, as we know, through the design process. Things are going up and down, but being able to do these delta checks using BIM, and in fact, we would even recommend asking the architectural teams to submit outputs from the BIM that say, how are we doing, would be one potential use of this process that would help firm that the project is on track. And another output, which we'll show in part 2 of this presentation, is there's a lot of other things that can happen now that the Seps to BIM process actually is using the templates that VA has created, the prototypical templates of these spaces. You can, for example, open it up on an iPad and say, what does this space look like and what type of equipment is used by non-BIM experts. You don't have to necessarily be a BIM expert that's using BIM to design and construct a project, but you can use a view like this to confirm what is a requirement either we're handing to the architectural teams, or if the architect is sharing the model with you, which is also becoming more the norm. And you have tools that can get to it, and there are iPad applications like this that let you BIM. And the interesting thing about these BIMs are that the data from Seps, in fact, you're seeing a pop-up here of a piece of equipment, a component. The information about the JSN number, for example, is there, as well as the name of the piece of equipment. And that came directly from the Seps output. There's no reason to manually type that into a CAD or BIM application. It basically shows up when you click on that base in 2D or in 3D. So these are optional things that can happen with the Seps output in BIM. And the architect, on the other hand, is also getting information about the space. Either the space has a prototypical layout, we're calling it it's a test, it's a BIM template. And the template is a version of the layout. It's not necessarily the final layout. The architect still has to design it. And as we know, in Seps, there are about 1,000 spaces that are used by VA. Out of those 1,000, there's about 500 that are what we call active. They're actively used in departments. There's about 500 that are dormant in some ways. They're not used on a regular basis. Out of those 500 actively, 200 templates. So we have 200 of the 500 that actually have layouts. The other ones look like this. They actually have the equipment in the space, but they're not arranged. They're we call it a delivery truck. It basically says, Seps, there's 30 pieces of equipment in this exam room, and if we open it up in BIM or in 2D or in 3D, we actually see those 30 pieces stacked in the corner like an IKEA box that's coming from the 1691 object library. And the architect then can focus on using this to work on the design process, and we train the department update AEs on how to even deliver BIMs as they're updating the departments that come back into the till. And just a side note here, the till updates of the departments in the past were delivered as PDFs or as CAD or other documents, and we're saying if the department update AEs delivers BIM as well, uses BIM to actually do the department updates, we will get updated BIM templates of the spaces, the rooms, that can be used in this Seps to BIM process. In the 1691, there's about 2,000 objects in the JSN, JSN objects. Of those 2,000, about 800 of them were created as 3D objects by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the DoD DHA. Because the JSNs are matching with what VA uses, that's a shared database to build VA-specific room templates. And then also there are new objects that are being created, so we're up to almost 1,000 of the 2,000 objects are actually three-dimensional. So you'd actually see a dental chair, for example, when you open it up in 3D applications, the BIM applications. And the other ones that don't exist would show up as what we call a red block, which would be the best see how much space does it take up in the room. So 2,000 mil standard 1691 objects, JSNs, about 1,000 of them have 3D objects. And we actually did a calculation. Out of the 2,000, about 1,300 or so are used on a regular basis. The other 700 are not used. They're kind of dormant. So it's pretty close to having almost all of the actual, is what they actually look like, which helps immediately to visualize it in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions and be able to have a conversation of, does this space have enough clearance from the chair to the cabinetry, for example. So the training material for the department update A's is online on the till. It describes how departments should deliver data back to VA, which actually helps in this overall process for the Seps to BIM work. Okay, so that's the end of the first slide set. And just as a side note, there's a very good 6-minute animation that was produced that's on the till now that walks through a very high-level view of what, and it kind of touches on some of these points that I've talked about here, but this is kind of a more generic view of how Seps is used at VA, and I recommend that you take a look at this on the till if you have not yet. It goes through some of the imagery that I also showed you as well. Okay, one more thing before we open up for questions. I wanted to show over the last year is the department updates that happen. So dental, for example, dental department was recently updated, and there are other departments that are coming online later this year. There's a lot of effort spent in gathering information of what is the latest clinical staff input on what this, how this department functions, and all this information goes through design iterations with the AE that works with VA to update the department. So there's a lot of effort that goes into this. This is still going to be happening, but what we're suggesting is all this information that would typically go in the till as design guides. In addition to that, these AEs are delivering BIM template room types, or the adjusted room types that are part of the design guides, as BIMs and as objects that match the 1691. So in addition to the design guide documents that go into the till, because they're already going through the process of collecting this information and putting it into Seps and even using BIM, the AEs that are updating these design guides are using BIM to produce. We're giving guidelines on how they can deliver BIMs, 3-dimensional models like this and objects like this that could be put into the VA library and aligned with Seps. That's the most important piece. So this becomes kind of the standard of how this is used for the updating Seps. And then the Seps output itself that I was describing just in the slides before, the output from Seps uses these objects and templates along with the Seps data, and it has cataloged the 2,000 objects that I talked about from the Mill Standard 1691, and it has BIM templates in there as well, and it has a department. So this is automated as far as being able to push a button and say, okay, show me the surgical suite, for example, or a dental department. So these are the default departments and spaces, what we're calling, well, here's a default dental DNTG1 room. Before we even get the how does this work for actual projects? So on projects, what we just described in the slides is if you hit that Seps Bim Excel Export button, you get an Excel file. This Excel file has IDs that match the BIM templates and objects, as well as what's in Seps. There are IDs in Seps that match these templates. So the design teams can then take this Excel export and use BIM applications. Here's Excel that are currently connecting to this, Revit, Onuma Systems, Sketchup, and they can use that for working on the project, the actual design project. So it has, where it's that DNTG1 room, has an extra piece of equipment in it because of this project, it will actually show up in the BIM, and an extra chair would show up, for example, in that room. And that's already working on these 3 BIM applications right here, and we're talking to other vendors as well. That was one of the goals here, is if we make this process neutral, then other vendors can come in, and other consultants can come in and say, hey, we can use this data to do A, B, C, and D. For example, Atenia, which is used in the operations and maintenance, delivering product-specific information, working with Atenia on several projects. Atenia said, hey, we can connect our product-specific information to the object. So as the design team is working through this, they can see the 6091 objects coming in saying, here's a dental chair. And then Atenia says, okay, the options for this dental chair, there's a striker chair, there's a other manufactured chair that the designers can then confirm as they're working through it, or it can make its way all the way into delivery. So the overall goal is that Seps has great data, therefore it should be used to process information through the design and construction process and even into delivery, and we're encouraging other applications to be added here. Okay. And here's some examples of what this is actually pretty interesting to hear. The type of things that can happen from the BIMs. You can actually create guide plates like this directly from the BIMs. So yeah, Atenia is used for selecting the actual equipment, the manual. That's a typical use of Atenia, but in the discussions with them, they are interested obviously in that activation portion, but they also saw the potential of, if they got in earlier on in the design process, they can, some architects are actually using Atenia in the design process, can actually reference Atenia and link to the Seps output. They can say, okay, here's that dental chairs. No, there's one that's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. So they would have access to that Atenia database if they have the Atenia software running at that point in time. Okay, so we'll take a break here for, if there are any questions and answers, we'll open up the microphones. And are there any questions about this first part of the presentation? Anybody online? If not, we'll continue on to part 2.
Yeah, this is Dan Terry in the CFM Central Region. I guess, Kimon, this question is as much for Renee as it is you, and that is that we've been pretty good these past couple of years of insisting that our architects use designs in BIM and so forth, but the vast majority of VA folks don't have Revit or SketchUp or other software tools to view or evaluate those submittals from the architect. So, I mean, they could say, here's the BIM model. We go, okay, great. It says BIM on it. It must be good. From the technology side, I guess, for Kimon, or maybe from the software side from Renee, is are there, say, browser-based tools that would enable us to view that that material, or is there some attempt to get planners the licenses for tools like Revit or SketchUp so that we could actually open, view, evaluate these BIM submittals?
Right, that's a great question, and in fact I'll be covering some of that in this next section, but that is a typical challenge. That obviously Revit is incredibly powerful and a lot of architects are using it, not only CAD and Bentley and everything. All those tools are obviously specialized tools that take some training to do, and even those vendors are, even Autodesk, for example, is putting out simpler applications to use to view things with. But a typical challenge is if the architect is using a BIM application for design and construction and you can't use that application, even SketchUp for that matter, how do you actually interact with that team? And there are several things that we've seen, our own personal experience. You can obviously, as an owner, first of all, you're requiring them or asking them to use BIM, requiring them to use BIM. If they're using BIM, then there are certain things that you can output from BIM as far as reports go. You can say, well, do a Delta report and give it to me from BIM so we can see how this project is going. That's one example. Web-based applications, which I'll show a couple of them actually in the second section, that actually lets you see parts of the BIM. Another challenge is that these projects, especially large healthcare projects, get very, very heavy with data and geometry, and that's one of the challenges of opening up these files even on a typical workstation. But now there are ways of opening sections of it. So you could say, okay, here's 1,000,000 square feet. What does it look like? Or what does this space look like? So there are ways of honing in on that, and I will be showing some of that as well. But the most important message at this point in time is this is kind of the first, it's a major milestone because you already have been using Seps for many years. And Seps has, by default, has data that's already perfectly structured to go into BIM. So be aware of that, and then have that conversation with the architectural teams of, hey, here's this new process. We're giving you Seps, but we're also giving you a way that you can actually pull it into BIM. Now, how they actually do it, they might do it manually, they might automate it, whatever, but there are specific IDs in Seps that can track a single piece of equipment as one example. So you can do that delta point. So getting into that first step of requiring it, then we'll start opening up ways of checking it in the future. And then the other interesting dynamic that has developed even in the last month, obviously Revit is used very heavily and it's a great tool, but other vendors that saw this process opening up now are interested in how can our application link into this. So Sketchup, for example, actually saw the data coming out of Seps, because before it was very difficult for them to even see the data, the standards, but now that that data is being published, they can say, hey, we see a database of 1691 equipment, we can actually link our objects to that database. So if all the vendors are, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's no way to raise your hand very easily in a webinar, and I apologize. This is Renee. The question the best I can. It is a problem if we consider that you have to have, say, Revit in order to see the model. It is not a problem in the sense that, as Commode is talking about, and he will continue to talk about, the use for planners particularly is we're strained by not having not the software per se, because SketchUp is basic. The basic SketchUp software is free. It doesn't require any money to get. The information that's you're able to look at is
yeah, but it's not really free for commercial application.
Sure.
To use it in the commercial application for free.
Well,
is it
regardless,
browser that you're suggesting?
Well, yes, of course, and the way VA is obviously you can correct me if I'm wrong because this is you guys' job, not mine, but we are not designing. So in a certain sense, the opportunity to look at it is all we really need, and to say, all right, this is the room we're talking about when you are having your in-depth discussions with our medical center clients on the ground. Do you need two more pieces? Now that there's an activations office, we've got people here. Some of those conversations probably will be held in a different fashion than they've been before. But the ability to actually see the 3D objects of the room and the equipment in those rooms are now possible through browsers. Information to design a floor plate, a building that is, obviously you need a software that will do that for you, which we don't have. And I continues to Revit is not a software that you can casually use. You have to be basically a speedrunner, and I don't see this being useful for us as or the room contents put together, really. I don't see how that's going to help us. But being able to view this, each room and the room contents, to be able to ask now for reports that are coming out of BIM, both in terms of matching what the program is, what the designer is providing us at various periods of performance review, gets much easier with this process than we had before, because everything is now presented in a way that that comparison can be done by the consultants in a very easy way.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe the most important the Seps output in some ways is BIM. It's data about the BIM. It's not the geometry yet. The Seps output, along with the object template library, along with the room template library, starts to generate the first version of the BIM. And there's many different stakeholders, including, like Renee explained, Revit obviously takes a specific type. You think in terms of, as a VA, you are providing the data of the requirements that goes into BIM, then you can start that conversation. Not everybody has to be able to be using all the different applications, including like I was pointed out earlier, Sketchup. From commercial use, yes, you do need a license if you actually start using it for projects and start doing other things. Now you can have a free version for testing to see more of a discussion between Sketchup and the person that licenses it. But there are, and in fact I'll show some web applications that were developed to manage this process that are web-based, that actually start showing what the room looks like or what the department looks like. And this is the second part of the presentation. It's an important point. We're transitioning now into what else can be done. If you're aware that this process is possible from Seps and export that Bim Excel file, that's a starting point into everything else. There's a lot that's going to be possible, that is possible with that export, and more will grow from that. And that's the main task there. Okay, so Atania, I want to just clarify that Atania is not used for facility management. It's used to structure data that would get put into the delivery of a project for operations, correct, Renee? It's
No.
Atania
is the tool that the activations office has selected to take essential events that come out of Seps, that they are going to be, in fact, as Kamon was saying, or just getting into talking about, is that list coming out of Seps for the room contents, which is a preliminary list, moves electronically in, can be moved electronically into Atania, which is what the activations people are using to actually make the final selection, or at least the final as final as it can be before it's actually purchased, of the room furnishings and medical equipment for each type of object that's in the room. So if you've got a patient bed, a bed, yes, there are 3 comparative catalog cuts for which that bed was generically taken, that's in Seps, but the actual bed options are not, we don't do a selection in Seps to decide which bed it's going to be and how is it going to be modified for the use that they need it. That will take place in Atania. It's basically a worldwide system that has all the vendors' information in it and can show all kinds of options in ways that Seps never was set up to do. And so the goal of the National Activations Office is to make sure that as soon as something comes out of Seps, which will go to the architect, and the room contents, which will go into Atania, will start to be made.
Right. And it's, in this context, it's an example of a team that has a specific use of the data that to Bim output and saw an opportunity to how they can connect what they're doing to this. And that's just one example, and I think there's going to be more, in fact, as we talk to other architects or consultants or software vendors and expose this process to them. We have started to see lights go on and say, hey, we can possibly do this in the future with this data. So that's the part that's kind of are things like what Atania saw that can start happening with this workflow.
Right. Can I ask if there's more questions? I'm sure there are.
Yeah, go ahead. Any questions? All right. So we'll try and wrap up in about 20 minutes here, so I want to go through it. If there are no more questions, and please feel free to interrupt. Now we're kind of in a brainstorming mode. We're in part 2 of showing what else is going to be possible with this. But one thing I want to point to is on the VA till, on the right side, there's a button that says Project Software Requirements, which leads to this page. And there's a new button here called Seps to Bim Training. If you go to this, is available here, including that introductory video that I mentioned in the beginning, and the slide presentation that I gave today, introductory slide presentation, is here as well. And then there are what we call the Part 1 and Part 2 guidelines for creating BIM templates and the BIM families that were handed to the department update architects as instructions. And there's training videos of how you would work with this if you're an architect, for example, or a department update architect, importing Seps to other applications and what's happening with the MIL standard 1691 objects and database as well. So if you can take a look at that. And then I want to also point to another site that's still in development. We're still working through some of this as far as it's a site that was created to point to specific utilities and tools and sources on the internet as far as these templates and objects go. So many different types of users, but for example, if you're an architect and wondering how this works, there's it's called sepstobim.org, and it explains along the top, it has an introduction and talks about the workflow and introduces how the objects were created and where to actually access them. So there are links here, for example, where you can actually go and find the latest objects from Revit. If you click on this link here, oops, sorry, we're getting this updated right now, but and also the Sketchup objects. So there's objects in 3 formats right now. Revit was the one that we started with from the Corps of Engineers. We aligned it with the objects online in our system to manage this project, and then SketchUp came along and actually translated them all to SketchUp. So right now, for example, there is availability on the 3D warehouse of all the 1691 objects in SketchUp. So you can actually go and, if you are a SketchUp user, you can go and search an object and find D3320, for example, I think is a dental chair. Yeah, there it is right there. So online, you can actually see the D3320, and it has the description even that came from the 1691 database. So you're actually aligning this particular to the 1691 database and the geometry that is in Revit. So if you're in Revit or in SketchUp, you're seeing the exact same object as you're designing, working on the project. So you can download these are free downloads from the SketchUp 3D Warehouse library. And as far as other apps, actually even organize our work because we're linking databases in the cloud and on the web. And the 1691 database, for example, is already publicly distributed even before it was online. It was distributed with CDs. So it's public data as far as what do we call these objects, what do they look like, the database, and as well as the objects for templates are basically standards of what are on the till. What does a typical dental exam room look like? Now is available as a BIM, and these BIMs can be downloaded as individual files but they can also be downloaded and viewed online live as well too. In the tools section, we're starting to use this as a gathering place to kind of point different vendors that other applications. We want this list to grow. This is the beginning of it. We started with Revit, and now we have it in 3 formats and talking to a 4th one right here as well. And as far as space and equipment goes, this is kind of an interesting tool that you can go. This is on, a utility that's online right now. So I can go in and put my email app because it sends you a link back. So let's say we want to create a DNTG1 room. If you know the room code, you basically hit proceed. And what this is doing is it's going to the database from Seps, which is the public part of the database, which is what does a DNTG1 room look like as a default, and grabs that and creates a BIM of that room. So if data in Seps gets updated, we would actually see this. This is still not project specific. It's a default information. And if we go to the output from that, it looks kind of like this. It basically has a viewer, a web-based viewer. And this one we actually created 2 rooms. This was created a while back. You can actually see the day was created as 29 days old. We created it a month ago earlier and then asked for a new one. But this is a BIM online that actually shows a 2D view of the room. And if you click on it, you can keep drilling down into it and open it and see the equipment and the information about that and the JSN numbers, etc. Or you can say, well, I really don't care about the BIM. I just want an Excel file that lists all the equipment in here. You can download the Excel file here, put it for Revit and Sketchup. So this is a free utility that creates Revit and Sketchup models of these single rooms.
I think it's important to note that VA people can get this information. This is all browser viewed.
Exactly, yes. This is browser viewed, and I think Renee, you the specifics of access to
VA people, yeah. We've got a block, but it all exists, and as soon as we can figure out whether it's on VA side or whether it's somewhere else so that the block is occurring, all this, what is being shown to you right now, is available to any VA person or anybody else. This is all on the till, just on a different format.
Exactly. And it's a free utility. That's also important. And the utility in the background is using our application. We decided to open it up because it's basically a viewer. It's kind of like a PDF viewer. And the same thing not only for spaces but for departments. So this pull-down list here, I went to the Department and Spaces tab here, and basically doing the same department as 222 Dental. This is ordered right now by department ID. And you hit proceed, and it basically builds the current default dental spaces and equipment from Seps and delivers it to you. So it's we still are not talking about projects here. It's just what does a typical dental department look like? What type of spaces are there? And it's going to point me to a link that can open up the browser view of that. In fact, here's the email I just received. An email looks like this and says, please use this and go look at it, and it opens up a browser view of the dental department with all the spaces and all the equipment that can also be pulled out to other applications, Excel, etc.
I mean, could you just open that up so people can see what that looks like there?
Here it is right here. Yeah, so this is color-coded by functional area, and you can see the actual spaces being built up here. It's going and grabbing all the latest equipment and the latest BIM templates. And you'll see that some of these spaces actually have layouts. So the BIM templates, dental exam room with the cabinets along the wall, and there's the dental chair in the middle. Let me zoom in on here a little bit. And then some other spaces, we're calling it a delivery truck method. So you see the spaces up here, for example, do not have a layout, do not have a BIM template test fit, but know which equipment goes inside the space, so it's delivering that equipment in the room. And the designer can still use the right tools to actually edit the BIM. Right now we're just looking at a viewer of the BIM in a web browser. So this
well, the reason why we've got this delivery truck situation here is that we have to have, we didn't go out to try to do everything all at once. We wanted to make sure this worked. It does, and now we're going to be inputting into place so that all the rooms are configured correctly, at least are analogous to what's in Seps.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
this is,
So, yeah, go ahead.
So that's like one each of all the types of rooms that can be in a dental service, correct? That's what we need.
Exactly. Yeah, we haven't touched the project side yet. So this is not from the Seps Bim Excel Export. This is just show me what's currently in Seps. And we found, even in this work of preparing these templates, these BIM templates, this is pretty interesting, even the delivery truck, because we don't have to say, well, in this room, there are these 30 pieces of equipment. Let's go find the right one, put it in the room in BIM, and then arrange it. This exact one-to-one match in what's in Seps, and it actually delivers it on that day. So you see this one that, remember we said 29 days old earlier? This one that I just generated is 0 days old. In other words, it was created today. And you could still open it up 30 days from now and you would see this view, but if you refresh it in 30 days and something changed in Seps, like for example, if a department standard gets updated, lets us actually confirm what's a current known baseline or the authoritative source of data in Seps, and what would it look like in BIM if we start generating BIMs from this. Okay, so the last thing I'll show is on this particular site is there's also a tab, and these are all free, one called a project generator. This one also, there's a free version of it. You can actually log in and get a free account. You do need an account, so we're giving a free account to anybody that wants to use this for an actual project even. We're not restricting it. But on this one, you can actually go in and get the Seps Bim Excel Export, the project-specific export. And if you go into Seps and edit that dental room and make it, instead of 120 square feet, 140 square feet, and add another chair, it would actually show up as that in the BIM that gets opened on the file when this gets generated. So it's you select your location, and then you select the Excel file, and you basically upload it, and it takes about a minute or so to the file that would have the actual layout of the space. And let's see. Okay, so one thing I wanted to show here is there was a question about how would this be used to view in other formats, and one format is Sketchup. The output that I imported that dental exam room into Sketchup, and this is what it looks like in Sketchup. It goes and grabs the latest object from their object library, places it in the room based on the layout that was generated in the BIM template department. So this is a default layout, and the red blocks that you're seeing here are objects that have yet to be put in the 3D warehouse in the SketchUp library. So we're waiting for a door, for example, for them to put it into the library. But there are about 1,000 objects out of the 2,000 so far already in there, and you'll see that the layout, it's design obviously, it's just like the till. It's an initial layout of what this room would look like in SketchUp. But it's actually our application. It's a free application, and what we're looking at is DNTG1. So this is a DNTG1 space, and you'll know the chair is selected, therefore it says this is D3320. All of this data came from the Seps export that I showed you earlier, and we can actually look at additional data. So the information, if there's additional information that wants to be added here, the data would show up. And you'll notice also that this space is a generic. It's still not designed, but it could be that output that I showed earlier if the space was made larger. And this particular file on the iPad actually has, let's actually search dental, for example, of spaces. What it does is it has every single prototypical space type from Seps available, and these are all the ones that say cast metal laboratory. I click on that and it jumps to that space or to another space. And this is actually an example of a delivery truck method space. And this one's pretty interesting because if you look at it in floor plan, you'll notice that the equipment actually is overflowing the room. Now, there might be many reasons for this, but this is a one-to-one match from Seps equipment, and here's the actual size of some of them, of all of them actually, and the ones that do not have a detailed geometry still have a block, and that block still has information about it. So you can actually start to see that from Seps, and the reason this looks crowded is because obviously these are countertops that stack on top of that, so that probably is resolvable. And the same thing we can search for is of the chair D3320. Search is searching through thousands and thousands, and if not tens of thousands of pieces of data, and finding that D3320 appears in this room, DNTE1 and DNTG1. So this is an iPad application. First of all, search what's in Seps and search the BIM templates without being a BIM expert, and even do things like, if you wanted to make comments of why is this, take this chair out, there are simple tools on the iPad like that that let you interact with the BIM. So that's one example of how this type of data, now that it's set up from Seps as a database and it's exported to BIM, use the exact same data and the exact same geometry and allow you to interact with that information. For anybody that's interested online, we can send you links to the utilities that I showed earlier, and if you want to get access to these applications as well, the free applications, I can send you links to that as well. Obviously, like Renee mentioned, method rooms, there's still about 300 of the 500 that are the delivery truck method. They don't have a layout like this, but they have the equipment in them. So you will see some of that development happening as department updates, which are scheduled to be going on continuously. Obviously, as new departments come in, more of these spaces are going to be built, and as new spaces get built, they'll be added to the library of spaces, and you'll see more detail coming from those as well. Okay. Yeah, Mark, I see a note from Mark Mueda that the VA computers are blocking the seps2bim.org. We're working through this. We need to get to the VA IT group that they're blocking it. Some of the pages are accessible. Some of them are being blocked for some reason. So we're going to find out why and distribute that information once it's resolved. Any more questions? We're getting close to the top of the hour here. We are available if there are follow-on questions, or if you want to give us a call. Renee, if that's okay with you, we can take.
Absolutely.
We're completely available, so feel free. I know we covered a lot of material. If we go back to the beginning of the presentation, it's really important just to realize that Seps Bim Export from Excel is really the starting point, and we'd like everybody to be aware of that as a very important piece, that when you're exporting, we want this export and to guide the design teams that are already using BIM anyway to use this to generate BIM, to point them to these sites on the till and the seps2bim.org site for resources as far as tools that are going to be constantly updated as well. And if there are any questions, just let us know. So thank you. We have recorded this session, and we'll make it available for those that would like to review it or weren't able to make it today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.